it.
Welcome
Everyone
to my
said
channel,
it was
The
impossible.
Untamed
The risk
Savior.
to a human team
Rescuing
was
a
too great.
mountain
The
Mustang
terrain, the weather,
in the
sheer
Rockies.
difficulty of
The
approach.
mountains hold secrets.
His name,
They are
if he had
monuments
one,
of
didn't matter
silence and
yet.
time,
All that
carved by
mattered was the sheer
forces who
drop
can
to
only
his
stand
left.
back and admire. But sometimes, in the thin air high above the tree line, those secrets manifest as whispers of life or shadows of tragedy. This is the Rockies in early winter, a place of raw, untamed beauty, a place where the wild ones roam. For centuries, these high passes have been the domain of the free-roaming mountain mustangs, creatures built for survival, their ancestors having crossed an ocean of time to claim this high ground. They move with an ancient, fluid grace, perfectly adapted to thin air and the sudden, brutal changes in weather. To witness them is to witness the original heart of the land. The call came in quietly, a simple report from a solitary hiker, a speck of dark movement against the blinding white of a northern ridge. Something was wrong. Something was desperately alone. The hiker, a man who understood the language of the high peaks, knew immediately that this was not a resting animal. It was a stranded one. He had managed a single shaky photo from miles away, capturing the hopelessness of the scene. The Ridge of Sorrow. That's what the locals called it. A wicked, isolated spire of rock, prone to sudden rock slides and deadly snow drifts. The Mustang, a dark bay stallion, was stranded there, injured, cut off, and facing the impossible equation of winter isolation. His coat was thick, meant to fend off the mountain's chill, but even the strongest armor eventually yields to endless exposure. He had been there too long. He had been fighting too hard. His name, if he had one, didn't matter yet. All that mattered was the sheer drop to his left, the impassable rock wall to his right, and the growing indifference of the falling snow. He was trapped in a photograph of despair, a statue of muscle and fear carved into the side of the world. He hadn't chosen this position, but the mountain rarely offers choices. It only presents consequences. Everyone said it was impossible. The risk to a human team was too great. The terrain, the weather, the sheer difficulty of approaching a wild, stressed animal on a narrow, icy ledge. The common wisdom was simple. Let nature take its course. This was the pragmatic voice of the mountains, a brutal logic that valued survival over sentiment. The locals, hardened by 1,000 winters, saw as a sad but necessary end to a good run. But common wisdom has never been the currency of the heart. To the rescue team, a small, dedicated group of mountain veterans, that Mustang wasn't just a casualty statistic. He was a piece of the wild spirit that needed a hand. They felt a specific responsibility, a kinship with the creatures who shared their challenging landscape. Elias, the leader, had spent his life among the peaks and had learned that respect for the wild must sometimes translate into intervention, not just observation. In a land built on defiance, they knew they had to defy the odds. They packed their specialized gear, their ropes and slings and harnesses, knowing that every pound they carried was a testament to the weight of their commitment. They checked and rechecked their knots, their lifelines, preparing to wager their own safety against the Mustang's chance for life. The clock was their real enemy. Every hour that passed sapped the horse's strength, pushed the weather into something crueler. The sun was an illusion up here, offering light but little warmth. The days were short, and the nights promised a freeze that could lock the horse in place forever. Elias simply strapped on his pack and looked up at the impossible peaks, the thin air already scratching at his lungs. His only guide, A grainy photograph, an instinct. He felt the vastness of the task pressing down on his shoulders, a physical weight heavier than his pack. The first mile was a rehearsal for failure. Drift swallowed their boots whole. The slope was already slick with a fresh layer of ice beneath the powder. The mountain wasn't just challenging them. It was actively rejecting them. It was a silent, massive guardian protecting its wounded. They had to fight for every step, using ice axes to gain purchase. Speaking only in short, clipped commands to conserve breath and focus energy. The silence of the peaks amplified their exhaustion, turning every labored breath into a confession of their limits. They couldn't go straight to the ridge. The direct route was a wall of impossible granite, vertical and unforgiving. They had to follow the winding, ancient trails of the herd, the paths of least resistance that still demanded maximum respect. These trails, often just faint depressions in the rock, were carved by generations of hooves, and they offered the only viable way up. They moved with the slowness of geologic time, their pace dictated by the mountain's indifference. Days turned into a single, exhausting blur. They slept in shifts, huddled under thin emergency tarps, their bodies aching in protest. They were fueled by cold coffee and the shared, unshakable belief that the horse was still waiting. The temperature dropped low enough at night to make their gear crackle when they moved, and the stars above them were vast and indifferent, reminding them of their own smallness. And the mountain showed its hand, not in a sudden storm that would have been quick and merciful, but in a gradual, draining cold, the kind that seeps into bone, dulls the mind, and makes every rational voice scream, "Turn back." It was a psychological war as much as a physical one, forcing them to push through the heavy fog of exhaustion. They had to rely on years of training to override the instinct to stop, to find shelter, to rest. The prints became clearer. They were the key to the story. The prints told of a struggle, a limp, an agonizing search for solid ground that never came. The horse had fallen. They realized high up, and in his panicked effort to escape the slide, he had stumbled onto the narrow, fatal shelf. Elias knelt by a patch of snow, touching the indentations. They were deep, the sign of a heavy animal, maybe 6 or 7 years old. He imagined the horse, powerful, black as coal, with a spirit as sharp as the granite around them, a leader or a challenger, now reduced to desperation. He noticed the uneven gait and hoof prints. The fall had damaged the leg badly. He shared his grim analysis with his teammates in a low voice. "He's big, and he hasn't given up yet. Look at this drag mark. He's been trying to move the weight off that leg for 3 days. That's a will to survive you don't often see." This was the hardest part of any rescue, the slow erosion of hope. They were getting closer, yes, but the closer they got, the more real the danger became. The ridge was visible now, a hairline fracture against the immense blue sky, agonizingly close yet still impossibly far. What keeps a rescue team moving when every fiber of their body argues for retreat? It's not glory. It's a simple, profound debt to life, a refusal to let a magnificent creature's fate be determined by geology and gravity alone. It is a fundamental declaration that, even in the indifferent silence of the mountains, compassion still holds a vote. They found the debris field of the rock slide, a massive scar on the mountainside, jagged, fresh broken stone that testified to the violence of nature. This was where the Mustang was separated from his herd, where the accident occurred. The air here was sharp with the smell of pulverized rock, a brutal reminder of the force that had trapped the animal. The final ascent was a rope job, pure climbing, gear over ice. Every step measured, every hold tested. One mistake here wouldn't mean a slip. It would mean the end of the line. A quick, fatal tumble down the scree slopes. They ascended in total focus, their minds locked onto the few feet of rope and rock directly in front of their faces. And then a sound, not the wind, not the crunch of snow, but low, guttural, almost metallic groan. A sound of absolute, grinding exhaustion, a sound that carried the weight of days of pain and fear. A faint, pained when he reached them, a sound that cut through the silence like a knife. They had found him, huddled near a slight overhang, not moving, a shadow of a wild thing, his coat thick with ice and desperation. He was still upright, but just barely. He was resting his head low, conserving every last ounce of energy. His dark eyes were open, wide, watchful, a beautiful, tragic sentinel of the mountain. He saw them, not with panic, not with the blind flight of the cornered, but with a weary, questioning look. His ears twitched, recognizing the presence of life that wasn't a predator. He was too tired to flee, too worn down for true aggression. This was the most dangerous moment. A wild horse in pain is a force of pure, unpredictable power. A sudden movement, a shift in his weight, and they could all be lost at the drop below. The ledge was barely wide enough for the horse, let alone for 3 humans and their gear. The air itself felt brittle with tension. Elias moved first. Slow, deliberate. He didn't approach like a captor, but like an offering. His hands empty, his voice low, almost a hum, using the ancient, soothing cadence of men speaking to distressed animals. "Hey, big fella, easy now. We're here. We're not going to hurt you." He projected calm, even as his heart hammered against his ribs. It wasn't about words. It was about energy, about translating human intent into something an animal could understand. Safety. The Mustang watched him, his nostrils flaring, testing the scent of foreign life on the wind. The horse's deep, rhythmic breathing was the only sound besides a thin wind. The injured leg was clear now, a nasty laceration, likely from a sharp piece of slate during the slide, and the severe swelling indicated a possible tendon or ligament tear. He couldn't put weight on it. His survival depended entirely on the good leg holding him on the slick ice, a precarious balance that couldn't last much longer. Elias pulled out a thermal blanket, a small bag of oats, and some sedative paste. He knew the risk of using the paste. It could make the initial recovery harder. But they couldn't move this powerful animal without easing his terror. The risk of him fighting the sling and injuring himself further was greater than the risk of sedation. He carefully scattered the oats near the horse's muzzle, the smell of powerful, familiar lure. He waited. 5 minutes. 10. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic puff of his own breath. He allowed the tension to hang in the air, refusing to force the interaction. And then, the smallest miracle. The Mustang lowered its head, testing the oats. It was a movement of exhausted resignation, a slight nod toward trust. It was a surrender, a tiny, fragile agreement between species. I will trust you with my life. Elias took the opportunity, moving in a practiced, fluid motion. He moved in, one hand on the horse's icy flank, the other quickly administering the sedative. The horse flinched, a deep spasm running through his body, but he was too depleted to fight. He remained standing, but his eyes glazed slightly as the medicine took hold. The team moved in then professional, silent. They worked not against a horse, but with his slow descent into twilight sleep. The objective: to get the rescue sling, a custom-made harness of wide, supported webbing, under his massive frame. They maneuvered the thick straps under his chest and haunches, supporting his body with their own as they worked. The weight of the horse, even sedated, was immense. The sling had to be placed perfectly, distributing the load across his chest and haunches, protecting the legs. This was engineering and empathy working in tandem, a careful application of physics to save a life. Every strap was positioned with meticulous care, knowing that their security was the only thing between the horse and the abyss. As they worked, Elias leaned close, stroking the thick, matted mane. He saw a scar above the horse's eye, a sign of old battles won. This was a fighter, a patriarch, perhaps. He spoke to the horse in a quiet voice, a soothing counterpoint to the technical work. "You've got years left in those legs, fella. Don't worry. We've got you." The revelation wasn't hidden truth, but a deep, shared feeling. In that moment, on that isolated ledge, there was no separation between rescuer and rescued. They were just life, holding on to each other against the void. The immense, cold mountain demanded solitude, but they had forced a moment of profound, shared vulnerability. The rigging was complete. The ropes were secured to the primary anchors they had painstakingly fixed into the rock face. They would use a controlled, slow descent down the cliff face to the lower canyon. A 400-foot drop with a paralyzed 1,200-pound package. It was a maneuver that demanded flawless coordination and nerves of steel. They called the extraction team down below. A massive helicopter, a true workhorse capable of high-altitude long-line work, was waiting miles away, ready to fly a long-line mission. But first, they had to deliver the Mustang to the pickup zone. The sound of static wire radio chatter, confirming the plan, offered a momentary connection to the world below. The command was given: lower. The rope began to feed through the friction devices. The mountain held its breath. The Mustang hung suspended between the rock and the air, a pendulum of hope, slowly descending. Slowly, inch by agonizing inch, they managed the descent. The wind tried to push the sling into the rocks. The ice tried to seize their ropes. But the team, anchored by sheer will, would not yield. They were carrying more than weight. They were carrying freedom. They controlled the speed, the rotation, the inevitable sway, ensuring the horse never crashed into the rock face. Their muscles screamed. Their hands were raw. But the commitment was absolute. The canyon floor, relatively flat, but still treacherous. The final phase, the long line flight. The biggest risk now was the extraction itself. Moving the horse from the sling on the ground to the high G-force of a high-altitude lift. The approaching heavy, throbbing sound of the helicopter rotors grew louder, echoing off the canyon walls. The sound of the rotor wash was deafening. A blizzard of snow, rock, and sound erupted as the powerful machine hovered high above, tethered by the long line. Visibility dropped to nothing but swirling white powder. Elias and the ground crew had mere minutes to secure the horse in the specialized transport carrier before the long line hookup. The Mustang was stirring. The sedative was wearing off, replaced by raw, panic confusion. He began to struggle, a massive surge of muscle that threatened to snap the webbing. The choice: hold him down, stress him out further, or trust that the brief moment of connection on the ridge had created a memory that would last just long enough. Elias chose the latter. He had to assume the horse remembered the comfort of their presence. He shouted commands over the noise. Quick! Harness on! Head hood! Be gentle. We need speed, not force. They worked in a violent ballet of speed and precision. The heavy transport had slipped over the horse's eyes, dimming the chaos and muffling the sound. The large aluminum carrier was brought up, and the horse was gently guided, then lifted inside. The carrier was padded, secure, and ready for flight. The long line came down, swaying wildly in the rotor wash, its shadow dancing over the snow. 50 feet of steel cable, ending in a massive hook. A decision had to be made about when to connect. Waiting meant more stress for the horse and greater risk for the team. Moving meant risking error under intense pressure. Elias made the final call. Now! Hook it! Move back! His teammate, Sarah, lunged forward, securing connection in a single practice motion. The loud metallic clank of the lock a signal of no return. The line went taut. The carrier, containing the wild heart of the mountain, lifted. It rose slowly at first, fighting the wind, then accelerated sharply, swinging out over the canyon. It was an astonishing sight, a massive animal suspended in the sky, carried away by modern technology, a silent promise being fulfilled. Below, the small team stood in the sudden quiet, covered in sweat and snow dust. They watched the speck disappear over the ridgeline. The heavy silence that returned felt like a profound mixture of exhaustion and profound, fragile success. The mountain was quiet again, but one of its secrets had escaped its grasp. The next 24 hours were the most critical. The flight, the landing at the veterinary clinic, the first diagnosis, the physical injury, the laceration was treatable, but the unseen injury, the trauma, the near starvation, the sheer terror, that would take longer. The vets went to work, their practice hands moving with urgency and care. The diagnosis was grim but hopeful. The leg was not broken, but the tendon was severely strained, requiring months of absolute rest and rehabilitation. For a Mustang, a creature born to run, rest was a prison. His mind, built for motion across vast distances, would struggle with the confinement of a stall. They named him Coda. It was a name that meant friend or ally in a language older than the mountains. He needed an ally now more than ever. He lay in a thick, warm stall, surrounded by clean straw, a world away from the frozen slab of granite. Yet his gaze remained distant, locked on the memory of the wild. The decision facing Elias and the team was not about saving his life. They had done that. It was about saving his spirit. Rehabilitation in captivity can break a wild animal, turning its internal fire into listless acceptance. The risk of him becoming a broken, non-releasable ghost of a horse was immense. He refused to eat. He paced painfully on his good legs, and he ignored the gentle hands of the clinic staff. The moral choice was simple: keep him comfortable until he healed, or risk pushing for connection, hoping to bridge the chasm between their worlds just enough for him to accept the slow, painful process of healing. Elias told the vet, "We need to talk to him, not just treat him. He's still a mountain, and he needs a path back to the mountain, not just a cure." Elias spent the next week quietly sitting outside the stall, not touching, not demanding, just present, reading a book, humming a tune, letting Coda adjust the sound of his breath, the shape of his presence. He wanted Coda to learn that a human being could exist nearby without posing a threat or making a demand. This was the hardest fight of all, the fight for trust. A wild heart is built on skepticism, but a heart nearing despair is also desperate for a connection. Coda would watch him, his gaze intense, assessing, deciding. He was measuring the man's patience, testing the limits of this strange new alliance. Slowly, day by day, Coda's posture softened. The flicker of suspicion began to yield to the steady assurance of presence. 3 months passed. 3 months of small victories. The first time Coda took an apple from Elias's hand, the soft, whiskered touch a moment of profound communication. The day finally put full weight on the healed leg, a cautious, tentative step that announces readiness. The gradual, almost imperceptible turn from a wild prisoner to a cooperative patient. He had regained his strength, his weight, and a cautious, profound respect for the man who had sat in silence outside his stall. He was ready, not for a new life, but for his old one. They drove him back up the mountain, not to the ridge, but to a vast, open mountain meadow, a natural gathering ground for the herds. This was the moment of truth, the true test of the rescue. The journey back was quieter, filled with anticipation. The air was clean, sharp, and laced with the scent of pine and wild sage. The sun was warm on his dark coat. Coda took a massive, deep breath, his nostrils flaring, pulling in the complex perfume of his homeland. He was home. Elias knelt and unclipped the lead rope. The gesture was simple, but final. No saddle, no halter, no fence. Just the vast, indifferent freedom of the mountains laid out before him, waiting to be claimed again. Coda stood motionless for a moment. He looked at Elias, a long, searching look that seemed to hold all the memory of the cold ridge, the helicopter, and the quiet man who sat and read in the silence. It was a moment of unspoken gratitude, a profound recognition across the species divide. Then he turned, not in a panicked bolt, but in a slow, deliberate trot. He moved with the joy of rediscovered capability, his healed leg working perfectly, chewing up the green earth beneath his hooves. The trot accelerated into a canter, and the canter became a glorious, full-out run. He ran to the edge of the clearing, stopped, and threw his head back, and from his lungs came a sound that echoed off the high peaks, a long, challenging, magnificent whinny. The call of the mountain made whole again, a declaration of life against the silence. He bucked once, a powerful, joyful movement, before disappearing over the rise. Elias watched until Coda was just a dark shadow disappearing into the folds of the canyon. A rescued life returned to its original glory. It was the purest definition of success, the full circle of a journey undertaken for the smallest of hopes. We often think of freedom as a simple absence of constraint, but Coda's story reminds us that true freedom is not the absence of trouble, but the courage to heal from the trouble you find. The scars remain physical and emotional, but they become testimonials to a will that would not break. The most beautiful thing a wild spirit can teach us is that it's okay to accept a helping hand, because connection is not always a cage. Sometimes it's the only rope that pulls you back toward the horizon. If this story of courage and connection touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes in second chances. Thank you for watching. It was a victory measured not in speed or flashiness, but in the profound, quiet choice of one small, beautiful creature to stay in the light. Clara smiles a genuine, private smile. She gives the foal a gentle rub under the mane, a true reward this time, earned by quiet bravery. And Clara knew, without a doubt, that this was the only way to heal a soul. You cannot force a flower to bloom by shouting at it. You can only water the soil, ensure the light is gentle, and wait for the sun. 3 months later, Echo is a healthy, vibrant yearling, running gracefully in a large green pasture with the other horses. She never became needy or overly dependent. She would walk over to Clara, stand for a moment of quiet recognition, and then canter back to her friends. A greeting, a check-in, a silent thank you. The true goal of training is not ownership, but releasement, to give a creature the tools to live independently, but the knowledge that they always have a safe port in the storm. Her secret method, spread among the small community of dedicated, quiet trainers. They called it the stillness, a technique based not on the pressure of training, but on the profound, respectful weight of not doing. The real revelation was this. We often look at the animal, see the damage, and assume we must be the powerful force that fixes it. We use pressure, technique, and reward as tools of repair. But the greatest gift we can offer a traumatized soul is not force, but space. Space to breathe, space to inquire, space to fail and be safe, space to finally realize that the greatest danger is gone and the safest thing in the world is simply being. The heart of the story wasn't the foal's trauma, but the human's choice. Clara chose to speak the quiet language horses understand best, the language of unwavering peace, delivered through stillness and presence. She accepted the slow clock of nature over the fast clock of human ambition, because ultimately, to heal a creature is not to tame its wildness, but to show that the world is finally, quietly, safe enough to be wild in, safe enough to run, safe enough to rest, safe enough to trust the ground beneath your feet. Never mistake patience for weakness. The deepest trust is earned not in the struggle, but in the long, quiet aftermath of the surrender of human force. If this story of quiet courage touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes in second chances, for animals and for the long, slow work of human patience.